welcome to Holy Heartbeats. My name is Nathan, and I narrate Christ-centered testimonies from all over the world. These testimonies include rapture and end-times visions, near-death experiences, encounters with angels and demons, God, Jesus, and even Satan himself. Please consider subscribing to my channel if you are fond of listening to these types of stories, and let me know what you think about these testimonies in the comments section below. Furthermore, for those who want to share their personal testimonies, visions, and revelations from God, you can send us your own stories at holyheartbeat7@gmail.com. I will be very honored to read your testimony, which may inspire, edify, and encourage a lot of people in their personal journey of faith with the Lord Jesus Christ.
The Catholic Church actually tried to stop the common man from possessing or reading the Bible on their own, and this intensified through the Middle Ages and later.
Is there a breaking up of our priesthood? Ever since we split the atom, the world has been split. And then he goes on to analyze the three marks of the diabolic: nudity, aggressiveness, and schizophrenic mentality. Because that's precisely what Satan did at the beginning of his public life, to tempt him from the cross. And that was the last temptation that was made by Satan's agents on the cross. Just come down and we'll believe. Old Screwtape in hell is graduating a lot of devils to send up to this earth. So Screwtape gives the valedictory address. And the theme of the address is, honestly, we're disgusted at the kind of trash that we're getting in hell. People are selling their souls so cheaply. And this is what Screwtape says to them. You disgraces, my thorns, shadies, and gentle devils, it would be vain to deny that the human souls on whose anguish we have been feasting tonight were of pretty poor quality. Oh, to get one's teeth into a Henry VIII or a Hitler. There was real crackling there, something to crunch. It warmed you inwards when you got it down. Instead, what do we have tonight? A mayor of a city with grass sauce. A lukewarm casserole of adulterers. Undersexed morons who blundered and trickled into the wrong beds in automatic response to sexy advertisements and to make themselves feel liberated. They are nauseating.
You will hear Catholics say this quite often, that the Pope is the vicar of Christ. What does this mean? The word vicar comes from the Latin word vicarius, meaning substitution. The Pocket Catholic Dictionary, written by John A. Hardin, defines the vicar of Christ as the Pope, visible head of the Church on earth, acting for and in the place of Christ. And when was the vicar of Christ term first used? It was not until the 8th century that the particular title, Vicar of the Son of God, was found in the fraudulent document called the Donation of Constantine.
In this story, before delving into the next chapter exploring the roles of the Pope and the Vatican within the Roman Catholic hierarchy and their alleged connection to broader conspiracies, much attention has been given to the Jesuit Order's influence over Pope Francis, often cited as the first Jesuit Pope. Some claim that the Jesuit Black Pope, a term used for the Jesuit Superior General, commands a significant degree of power, influencing not only the White Pope, but also groups like the Knights of Malta, Opus Dei, the Knights of Columbus, and other secretive organizations. These include entities such as the CIA, Freemasons, and Illuminati, often linked to shadowy and controversial narratives. According to these theories, the hierarchy of earthly power is said to begin with Lucifer, whose name means light bearer. Lucifer, now regarded as Satan following his fall from grace, is depicted as the commander of dark forces. These forces, portrayed as demonic and interdimensional, are described as tools of deception, working against humanity and the divine. Some believe that rituals rooted in ancient occult practices, such as those tied to the Kabbalah originating in Babylon in the 6th century BC, are still in use today, supposedly aiding in global domination. In this narrative, such practices are thought to serve the agendas of individuals described as powerful and otherworldly, sometimes even referred to as descendants of reptilian hybrids, a concept popularized by figures like David Icke. A contentious debate frequently arises online, presenting the Jesuit Order and certain influential Jewish groups as competing for dominance within the so-called pyramid of power. On one side, the Jesuits are portrayed as enigmatic power brokers, while on the other, Jewish elites are represented by prominent banking families like the Rothschilds and Rockefellers, along with media moguls and organizations such as AIPAC and the ADL. Critics of this narrative argue that such perspectives often devolve into baseless blame games and unproductive demonization. Others, however, maintain that these groups function as part of a larger, unified network operating under the guise of various labels, but ultimately aligned with alleged satanic principles. Historically, it is noted that the Jesuit Order's origins trace back to the 16th century, when its founders were said to be crypto-Sephardic Jews influenced by Illuminati ideals in Spain. They reportedly adopted the name Alumbrados, or the Enlightened Ones, drawing upon Talmudic and Kabbalistic traditions that emphasized secret knowledge as a pathway to self-deification. However, the Alumbrados faced persecution and were eventually outlawed in Spain. Among them was Ignatius of Loyola, a former soldier injured in battle. During his recovery, Ignatius reportedly reimagined his beliefs and formed the Society of Jesus, commonly known as the Jesuits. While presented as a Catholic military order, critics suggest that its deeper motives were more aligned with countering Protestant Reformation efforts. In this story, Loyola's reinvention of himself and the creation of the Jesuit Order became an enduring part of historical and conspiratorial discourse. His narrative, like that of many others throughout history, is complex, layered, and often interpreted through the lens of those who seek hidden meanings in world events. In this story, atop the mysterious and shadowy hierarchy of power, there exists a system tied to ancient bloodlines and secretive organizations. It operates under many names: the Jesuits, the Knights of Malta, the Illuminati, the Royal Windsors and Black Nobility, the Freemasons, Skull and Bones, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Committee of 300, the Club of Rome, the Trilateral Commission, the Pilgrim Society, the Bilderbergers, and gatherings like the Bohemian Grove. These groups are often claimed to work together as part of a global network, carrying out the supposed will of their dark master, Lucifer. The Jesuit general, often referred to as the Black Pope, is said to collaborate closely with the reigning White Pope, the Vatican, and powerful families connected to the Illuminati. Together, they are linked to numerous secret societies and organizations, including intelligence agencies like the CIA and governments worldwide. These theories suggest that for centuries, a small group of elites has maintained control over humanity through tactics such as perpetual conflict, division by race, religion, and class, and economic hardship. The narrative also alleges that the world's major religions were devised as tools to divide and manipulate the masses, consolidating power into the hands of a few. This chapter pulls back the curtain on the Jesuit Order, also known as the Society of Jesus, which was founded in 1534 by Ignatius of Loyola. Born in 1491, Ignatius lived in a tumultuous time when Spain expelled its Jewish population. As a young man, he grew up amidst the brutal Spanish Inquisition, a period marked by widespread persecution. During this era, countless individuals, Jews, Muslims, and suspected heretics, were tortured, imprisoned, or killed in the name of religious purity. To survive, many Jews converted to Christianity, becoming conversos. However, questions often lingered about the sincerity of these conversions, and many faced ongoing suspicion and discrimination. Ignatius of Loyola, born into this environment of upheaval and distrust, eventually emerged as a controversial figure. Before founding the Jesuit Order, some accounts suggest he was connected to the Alumbrados, a Spanish group associated with mystical and esoteric practices. This group believed that humans could attain godlike wisdom and power through discipline and secret knowledge. As leader of the Jesuits, Ignatius welcomed individuals from diverse backgrounds, including other conversos seeking refuge from persecution. Over time, many of these individuals rose to positions of prominence within European nobility and the Catholic Church hierarchy. In this story, the Jesuit Order is portrayed as a group that, despite setbacks, thrived through strategies of adaptation, deception, and perseverance. Under Ignatius's leadership, the Jesuits were trained to infiltrate and influence powerful institutions, ensuring their survival and achieving their goals. Some interpretations suggest that this strategy was fueled by a deep-seated desire to overcome the persecution endured by their ancestors, as well as to exact retribution on those they saw as oppressors. Ignatius's life unfolded against the backdrop of Spain's efforts to establish religious homogeneity. Up to 1 million Muslims and hundreds of thousands of Jews converted to Catholicism during this time, often under duress. Many of these individuals were accused of secretly practicing their original faiths, leading to further waves of violence and exile. Spain's anti-Semitic policies drove away many skilled and educated individuals, a loss the country attempted to address centuries later by offering descendants of Sephardic Jews an opportunity to reclaim Spanish citizenship. However, this gesture did not extend to descendants of the Muslim Moors who had similarly been forced to flee. Through these layers of history, Ignatius crafted a dual persona. Outwardly a devout and spiritual leader, but inwardly, according to some theories, a figure who harbored more complex motives. His Jesuit order, often accused of subversion and manipulation, would go on to wield significant influence within the Catholic Church and beyond, leaving a legacy that remains the subject of both admiration and suspicion. In this story, Ignatius of Loyola's rise to power within the Catholic Church was strategic and deliberate. By forming the Society of Jesus, also known as the Jesuit Order, he crafted an organization that outwardly promoted the love of Jesus while building a foundation for influence and control. To secure their position and avoid prejudice, Ignatius and his co-founder, Francis Borgia, adopted a strict stance against their own Jewish heritage. In 1593, the Jesuits enacted a law barring Jews from entering their ranks, even removing those who had not yet completed their final vows. However, many crypto-Jews who had already reached the fourth vow remained in the order, blending into their environment and adopting survival strategies that involved turning on their own kind in public. For these individuals, survival during the Inquisition often meant making difficult and morally complex choices. Sacrificing a few to protect the rest became a harsh reality. In secret, they harbored resentment and sought revenge against both perceived and real oppressors, whether they were Catholic authorities, Protestants, Jews, or Muslims. Their worldview was shaped by a sense of self-preservation that justified deception and manipulation, living by the belief that the ends always justified the means. For them, safety could only be achieved through gaining power and control, often through extreme measures. Some scholars have drawn parallels between the Jesuits and the disbanded Templar order, suggesting that the Society of Jesus may have inherited aspects of the Templars' legacy. The Templars, who were dissolved 2 centuries earlier, were known for their esoteric practices and connections to Kabbalistic traditions. In Spain, some former Templar knights were absorbed into military orders such as the Order of Calatrava and the still active Order of Montesa. By 1541, these influences coalesced into the Jesuit order, co-founded by Ignatius and St. Francis Borgia. Borgia, a prominent figure in Spanish and Catholic history, was the third Jesuit Black Pope, and a descendant of Spain's King Ferdinand II of Aragon, as well as Pope Alexander VI of the Borgia family. The Borgias, long associated with power and intrigue, were a mixed Spanish-Jewish bloodline, with significant influence in both religious and political spheres. Under their leadership, the Jesuit order developed a reputation for militancy and cunning. Ignatius himself emphasized strategies of subterfuge and manipulation, as reflected in the guidance attributed to him. Nor will it contribute a little to our advantage if, with caution and secrecy, we foment and heighten the animosities that arise among princes and great men, even to such a degree that they may weaken each other. But if there appear any likelihood of reconciliation, then as soon as possible let us endeavor to be the mediators, lest others prevent us. Finally, let all with such artfulness gain the ascendant over princes, noblemen, and the magistrates of every place, that they may be ready at our beck, even to sacrifice their nearest relations and most intimate friends, when we say it is for our interest and advantage. In this story, even the Jesuit logo has been subject to varying interpretations. Devout Catholics explain the letters IHS as an abbreviation for Jesus, derived from the Greek letters iota, eta, and sigma. However, others suggest a deeper connection to ancient pagan traditions. These interpretations link the Jesuit symbol to Egyptian mythology, claiming it represents the triad of Isis, the mother goddess of protection and power, Horus, god of the sky and wisdom, and Set, god of chaos and war. These deities, they argue, were also venerated by groups like the Templars and Freemasons, connecting the Jesuits to a lineage of mystical and esoteric traditions. In this story, the Jesuits are portrayed as deeply secretive, their history intertwined with that of other shadowy organizations like the Illuminati, Freemasons, Templars, and the Malta Knights. These groups, according to some accounts, are said to share similar rituals and beliefs, bound by an allegiance to a singular, mysterious source of power. To reach the highest rank of a fully professed Jesuit priest, having taken the fourth and final vow, requires decades of dedication, study, and prayer. This rigorous preparation sets the Jesuits apart, positioning them as intellectual and spiritual leaders within the Catholic Church. Their mission began as a direct response to the Protestant Reformation, which had diminished the Church of Rome's influence across Europe. Within a century of its establishment, the Jesuit Order had grown immensely. By 1640, more than 500 Jesuit institutions of higher learning were established, and their influence has only expanded since. Today, Jesuit schools and universities educate millions of students around the globe, shaping minds and spreading their teachings. In this story, education became a powerful tool, allowing the Jesuits to not only spread their influence but also solidify their presence in worldly affairs. Over time, they developed a reputation for infiltration and manipulation. By gaining the trust of nobles and royalty through confessions, they accessed vital information, which they often used to their advantage. Their strategies included labeling Protestants as heretics, skillfully sowing discord, and positioning themselves as indispensable mediators. These tactics made the order highly effective in the early years, leading to rapid growth. By 1710, their numbers had risen to 19,000 members, and by 1749, they boasted 22,000. However, their methods did not go unnoticed. By the mid-18th century, the Jesuits faced growing opposition from kingdoms and governments alike. Their aggressive pursuit of power, involvement in political intrigue, and reputation for stirring up conflicts led to widespread bans across Europe. Portugal was the first to outlaw the order in 1759, followed by France in 1764. Soon, Spain, Naples, Sicily, Austria, and even Russia joined the anti-Jesuit movement, effectively isolating the Society of Jesus to Rome by the late 18th century. The backlash against the Jesuits forced them to adapt. In this story, their alliances shifted, and they found refuge in more tolerant nations like Britain and Prussia, where they continued their work in subtler ways. Meanwhile, the influence of the Habsburg Jesuit alliance in Europe began to wane. The Bourbon dynasty, particularly under Spain's King Carlos III, took a strong stance against both the excesses of the Inquisition and the actions of the Jesuits. His moral reforms marked a turning point, challenging the dominance of the Jesuits and curbing their influence. In this story, the Jesuits faced mounting accusations and opposition, particularly in Spain and Portugal's New World colonies of Latin America. They were charged with stirring rebellion, seizing land, and hoarding wealth from the crown. These allegations provided powerful reasons for many to call for the Society of Jesus to be abolished. Over the centuries, nearly every European nation expelled the Jesuits at one time or another. Even in the United States, they were rarely welcomed. By 1931, a total of 83 nations, city-states, and cities had banished the Jesuits from their borders. The pressure on the Vatican to act against the Jesuits grew overwhelming. In February 1769, Pope Clement XIII prepared to dissolve the Jesuit order. However, he fell mysteriously ill the night before finalizing his decision and passed away. His last words were said to be, "I am dying, It is very strange to attack the Jesuits. Not long after, Pope Clement XIV took decisive action. In 1773, he issued a papal bull officially dissolving the Jesuit order. Yet his decision came with consequences. On his deathbed just a year later, his final words reportedly revealed his fears. "Alas, I knew they would poison me, but I did not expect to die in so slow and cruel a manner." Despite the legal shutdown, the Jesuits found ways to continue their mission. In this story, 3 years after their formal abolition and just before the signing of America's Declaration of Independence in 1776, Adam Weishaupt, a Jesuit-trained scholar, founded the Bavarian branch of the Illuminati. With financial backing from the Rothschild family, this new organization became a secretive front for Jesuit operations. According to some accounts, this allowed them to avoid blame while continuing their efforts. In 1778, the Vatican declared America's constitutional republic an abomination and called for its destruction by any means necessary. The Jesuits' reputation for intrigue and subversion had grown, making them unwelcome in both Europe and America. Forced to adapt, they formed alliances with Freemasons in Britain and Prussia. Napoleon Bonaparte, who rose to power in the late 18th century, viewed the Jesuits with suspicion. He once described them as follows: "The Jesuits are a military organization, not a religious order. Their chief is a general of an army, not the mere father abbot of a monastery. The aim of this organization is power, absolute and universal power." When Napoleon was defeated in 1814, Pope Pius VII, previously imprisoned, reinstated the Jesuit order. This decision sparked strong reactions. Former U.S. President John Adams wrote to Thomas Jefferson, lamenting the restoration as a step toward darkness, cruelty, perfidy, and despotism. Adams added, "If ever there was a body of men who merited eternal damnation on earth and in hell, it is this society of Loyolas." French General Marquis de Lafayette, a key ally in America's Revolutionary War, echoed these concerns. He warned, "If the liberties of this country, the United States of America, are destroyed, it will be by the subtlety of the Roman Catholic Jesuit priests. They are the most crafty, dangerous enemies to civil and religious liberty, and have instigated most of the wars of Europe." In this story, the Jesuits' ability to infiltrate and seek revenge has been a defining feature since their earliest days. Their history is intertwined with the events of 1312, when Pope Clement V and France's King Philip IV collaborated to abolish the Templar Order. The ideological alignment of the Jesuits with the Templars, particularly in areas such as Gnosticism and the occult, can be traced back to shared historical roots. The Templar influence left a lasting mark, and the Jesuits inherited not only this legacy, but also the Templars' rivalry with the Knights of Malta. This rivalry eventually contributed to the Templars' downfall, but it also sowed the seeds for the Jesuits' future motives. When Pope Clement XIV issued the decree dissolving the Jesuit order in 1773, the act was enforced across much of Europe. This move was met with deep resentment, and in this story, some say the Pope's death was no coincidence, but rather the result of retaliation. The Society of Jesus, seeking ways to survive, struck covert agreements with Protestant factions in England, allowing them to weather the widespread ban on the continent. By 1814, following Napoleon's defeat, the Jesuits regained their power in Rome and solidified their influence. Since then, their reach has only expanded across the globe. Less than 50 years later, another opportunity arose for the Jesuits to influence world events. During the American Civil War, Pope Pius IX, aligned with Rothschild bankers, openly supported the Confederate cause. The Pope even wrote to Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, encouraging rebellion among Catholic Northerners. This was part of a broader strategy to destabilize the United States through division. Historically, the Jesuit order had opposed movements promoting liberty, often employing tactics of divide and conquer to weaken sovereign governments in places like Mexico, Spain, and France. In this story, the Vatican was accused of spreading falsehoods about President Abraham Lincoln, claiming he had been baptized as a Catholic but later rejected the faith, making him an apostate. Such claims were used to justify his assassination under canon law. Jesuit assassins reportedly plotted to ambush Lincoln in Baltimore, but the president, forewarned, altered his travel plans and avoided the trap. Years earlier, Lincoln had encountered the Jesuits as a young lawyer in Illinois. In 1853, he represented Charles Chinnockee, a priest who had challenged the corruption of the Jesuit Archbishop of Chicago. Chiniquy had been targeted by a conspiracy of slander orchestrated by an unscrupulous priest. With Lincoln's legal expertise and the unexpected testimony of a critical witness, Chiniquy's innocence was proven and the plot against him was exposed. Chiniquy eventually left the Catholic Church and became one of Lincoln's trusted advisors, warning him of the Jesuits' penchant for retribution. In his book, 50 Years in the Church of Rome, Chiniquy argued that the Jesuits were responsible for Lincoln's assassination, claiming they manipulated John Wilkes Booth into committing the act. He reminded Lincoln of other high-profile assassinations linked to the Jesuits, including Pope Clement XIV, Admiral Coligny, and several European monarchs like Henry III, Henry IV, and William of Orange. The reach of the Jesuits extended beyond America. During the same period, two Russian czars, Alexander I and Alexander II, fell victim to assassination plots. Both had expelled the Society of Jesus from Russia, and Alexander II, in particular, supported Lincoln during the Civil War. This support placed him in direct opposition to the Jesuits, as well as to England and France, who sought to divide the United States. In this story, Mary Surratt and her son John Surratt were closely linked to the assassination plot against President Lincoln. Mary's Washington, D.C. boarding house became a gathering place for conspirators, including Catholic priests who regularly met there. These meetings suggested a possible connection between the assassination plot, the Jesuit Order, and the Vatican. When the conspirators were arrested, it was noted that all of them were Catholic. John Surratt managed to escape capture initially by fleeing to Montreal, where Catholic priests reportedly assisted him. They helped him obtain false identification and arranged his travel to Europe. There, Surratt joined the Papal Zouaves, an infantry force dedicated to defending the Papal States against the movement for a unified Italy. Eventually, Surratt was captured in Egypt while wearing his Zouave uniform and was extradited to the United States to stand trial. Despite the evidence against him, including charges of murder and conspiracy, the trial ended in a hung jury. When he was retried for rebellion, the case was mysteriously dropped. Unlike his mother, who was convicted and executed alongside 3 other conspirators after a swift military tribunal, John Surratt lived out the rest of his life, passing away in 1916 at the age of 72. In this story, a recovered letter written by John Wilkes Booth in 1864 to another conspirator revealed eerie similarities to an alleged oath attributed to certain secret societies. Booth's letter mentioned methods of assassination, including the poisoned cup, the strangling cord, the steel of the poniard, or the leaden bullet. The letter also hinted at a failed earlier attempt to poison Lincoln, in addition to the well-known Baltimore ambush that Lincoln had narrowly avoided by altering his travel plans. Booth even attended Lincoln's second inauguration, carrying a knife with the intention to use it, but ultimately deciding months later on a .44 caliber bullet as the means of assassination. From 1841 to 1865, 3 out of 4 U.S. presidents, William Henry Harrison, Zachary Taylor, and Abraham Lincoln, were reportedly targeted and killed, with James Buchanan narrowly surviving an alleged poisoning attempt. In this story, such events created deep tensions between the U.S. government and the Vatican, culminating in a severance of diplomatic relations in 1867. This pattern of political intrigue continued, with some claiming that up to 7 presidents may have been assassinated by various covert factions over the years. Andrew Jackson, another president who opposed centralized banking, famously survived an assassination attempt when the assailant's weapon jammed. Jackson's resistance to the establishment of a central bank was echoed by Lincoln and later by President John F. Kennedy. Both men introduced alternative monetary policies that bypassed private banking institutions, with Lincoln creating Treasury-issued greenbacks and Kennedy proposing reforms to strip the Federal Reserve of its power. In this story, both leaders' reforms are speculated to have played a role in their untimely deaths. Kennedy's presidency further placed him at odds with powerful forces. After the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, Kennedy refused to provide air support, angering factions within the military and intelligence communities. His subsequent decision to withdraw advisors from Vietnam threatened to derail plans for a larger conflict in Southeast Asia. Adding to this, Kennedy dismissed CIA Director Allen Dulles and announced plans to restructure the CIA, moves that alienated key players within the intelligence apparatus. In one of his famous speeches, President Kennedy warned of the dangers posed by a monolithic and covert system of influence, what some today refer to as the deep state. In his words, For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. In this story, connections are drawn between central banking, the Jesuits, and historical events that shaped the world. Among these is a claim that the sinking of the Titanic in 1912 was not merely an accident, but a deliberate act to eliminate opposition to the creation of the Federal Reserve. According to the narrative, Jesuit financier J.P. Morgan orchestrated the tragedy by inviting three powerful figures, Benjamin Guggenheim, Isidor Straus, and John Jacob Astor, onto the ill-fated ship. These men, staunch opponents of central banking, perished when the Titanic sank, allegedly allowing the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 to proceed without significant resistance. This act, passed during a congressional holiday break, along with the implementation of the federal income tax that same year, marked a turning point in economic control and governance. In this story, the Jesuits are portrayed as masters of covert operations, using subversion to achieve their aims. Such tactics, it is suggested, have been employed repeatedly throughout history. Fast forward to the 20th century, and we find the testimony of Alberto Rivera, a former Jesuit priest who became a vocal critic of the order. Rivera claimed to have witnessed corruption and secrecy within the Jesuit ranks. He recounted being invited to a clandestine ritual where he noticed a Masonic symbol on the ring of a high-ranking Jesuit official, a revelation that shook his beliefs. Rivera later converted to Protestant Christianity and dedicated his life to exposing what he described as the Jesuit agenda of global domination through infiltration and suppression of dissent. Rivera's outspokenness came at a high cost. According to the narrative, he survived one attempt on his life via poisoning but succumbed to another alleged attack 4 years later, passing away at the age of 61. His warnings were later taken up by Gerard Bouffard, a former Catholic bishop from Canada. Bouffard claimed insider knowledge of the Vatican's operations, asserting that the Jesuit superior general, often referred to as the Black Pope, wields ultimate control over the White Pope and the Church's global influence. Bouffard argued that these leaders manipulate world events, playing a dual role of peacemaker and instigator of conflict. Bouffard further alleged that the Vatican's influence extends to orchestrating wars and fostering divisions across nations and religions. He described the Jesuits as master infiltrators who aim to destabilize global systems to pave the way for a one-world government. According to him, the Jesuits' influence isn't limited to religious institutions, but extends to political leaders and global organizations. He claimed that their ultimate goal is to dismantle Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and other faiths, replacing them with a unified religion rooted in darker ideologies. In this story, Bouffard painted a dire picture of hidden agendas and covert manipulation. He claimed that the Church itself was not immune to destruction, stating that its traditions and symbols had been corrupted to reflect deeper, more troubling influences. People can't imagine how evil and how much destruction they have caused, Bouffard warned. He alleged that the Vatican secretly monitors Israel, harboring intentions of undermining Jewish sovereignty and eroding religious traditions globally. Bouffard's narrative emphasized the duality of the Vatican's image, suggesting that its public face as a force for good conceals a darker reality. In his words, the Church's actions are aimed at bringing about the destruction of the Catholic Church itself, to replace it with a single, global religion. He pointed to symbols and practices within the Church that he claimed reflected these hidden agendas. In this story, the Jesuit Order faces significant scrutiny, not only for its historical influence, but also for modern controversies. Over the years, the Order has been required to pay substantial settlements to victims of abuse. One of the largest payouts occurred a few years ago in the Northwest and Alaska, where a settlement of $166.1 million was reached to compensate more than 400 Native American survivors of abuse. This was the third largest settlement in Church history, following two massive payouts in Southern California, $660 million to 508 victims in Los Angeles, and $200 million to 144 victims in San Diego. In this story, questions of accountability arise as the handling of these cases comes under criticism. For example, a Jesuit priest named Donald McGuire faced allegations of misconduct after a family reported to another priest in San Francisco that McGuire had abused their 16-year-old son. Instead of decisive action, the Chicago Jesuit authorities sent McGuire to a brief psychiatric program and allowed him to resume his duties, during which he continued to harm other children for 9 more years. This response, while unfortunately common, violated California state laws requiring mandatory reporting of suspected child abuse to law enforcement. Eventually, McGuire was convicted in federal court of sexually assaulting 2 boys and is now serving a 25-year prison sentence. Despite these challenges, the Jesuit Order continues to present itself as a force for good. On their website, the Order emphasizes their mission to find God in all things and their dedication to the greater glory of God and the good of all humanity. As of 2016, the Jesuit Order boasted 16,378 members, making it the largest Catholic male religious order. However, this number reflects a sharp decline from its peak of over 28,000 members in 1977. While membership has decreased, the order's influence appears to have grown in other ways. From its inception in 1534, the Jesuits, led by Ignatius of Loyola, prioritized education and the dissemination of ideas as key strategies for expanding their influence. Today, this approach is evident in the network of Jesuit educational institutions. In the United States alone, 28 Jesuit colleges and universities have become prominent, often serving as training grounds for future leaders in government and business. Globally, Jesuit education extends to 189 institutions of higher learning in 40 countries and 362 secondary schools in 55 nations, solidifying their presence on an international scale. In this story, the reach of Jesuit education is not merely academic but also political. The number of U.S. presidents, vice presidents, members of Congress, Supreme Court justices, and key cabinet officials who are alumni of Jesuit institutions underscores their far-reaching influence. As of the 115th Congress, over 10% of its members were graduates of Jesuit schools. Even Donald Trump, before transferring to the University of Pennsylvania, spent 2 years at Fordham University, a Jesuit institution. For nearly 500 years, the Jesuit Order has cultivated an elite network through education, producing individuals who occupy powerful positions worldwide. In this story, the influence of Catholic leadership in American history is noteworthy, though relatively limited in its highest offices. To date, only 2 Catholics have served as either president or vice president, John F. Kennedy and Joe Biden. However, the judiciary, particularly the U.S. Supreme Court, has seen a significant transformation in recent decades. Once predominantly Protestant, the court now has a Catholic majority, including Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Clarence Thomas. Both are associated with influential Catholic groups, such as Opus Dei. Additionally, nearly a third of the current justices are Jewish, reflecting a diverse but strategically influential makeup. In this story, the relationship between the U.S. government and the Catholic Church has evolved over time. A notable turning point occurred during the Reagan administration when President Ronald Reagan, a member of the Knights of Malta, re-established diplomatic relations with the Vatican after a 113-year hiatus. This decision was part of a broader geopolitical strategy, including efforts to counter Soviet influence during the Cold War. Reagan's administration was marked by the presence of key advisors and allies with strong ties to the Catholic Church, underscoring the enduring connection between religious institutions and political power. In recent years, similar patterns of Catholic influence have emerged within the U.S. military. For example, 2 consecutive chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Martin Dempsey and Joseph Dunford, were devout Catholics. Dempsey is a Knight of Malta, and Dunford, who attended Catholic educational institutions, further highlights the significant presence of Catholic leadership in strategic roles. In this story, the reach of the Catholic Church extends beyond government and military influence. Financial power also plays a crucial role. The Church, along with affiliated organizations, has historically held stakes in major financial institutions, including Bank of America and Wells Fargo. At one point, the Vatican reportedly owned multiple American banks, and its financial influence remains a subject of discussion and speculation. The Rothschild family, known for its banking dynasty, has long been associated with managing the Vatican treasury. a position that underscores the interconnectedness of wealth, religion, and global influence. The Catholic Church's holdings are vast, encompassing shares in major corporations and transnational entities. Companies such as General Electric, Coca-Cola, Exxon, and Walt Disney are often cited as having connections to Jesuit or Vatican interests. Additionally, the Church's tax-exempt status allows it to amass significant wealth while maintaining a position as one of the most financially powerful institutions in the world. In this story, the moral and ethical implications of such immense power come into question. While the Church advocates for spiritual values and humility, its accumulation of material wealth and influence appears at odds with its teachings. This dichotomy becomes especially stark when viewed alongside the widening economic disparity between the world's wealthiest individuals and the growing number of people living in poverty. When the Catholic hierarchy pretends to worship Jesus, who shunned materialism and wealth, while the Catholic Church itself is the biggest financial power on earth, in the face of the ever-widening gulf separating the 1% rich and the 99% poor, the institution's moral depravity and hubris is grotesque and obscene. In this story, we turn our attention to the shadowy world of secret societies, which can be both religious and non-religious in nature. While some are official Catholic military orders, others, like the Freemasons and the Illuminati, are more overt about their allegiances. Despite the differences in outward appearance, these organizations share a common goal. They aim to subtly infiltrate various sectors of society, including other religious groups, secret societies, large corporations, government bodies, whether elected or appointed, militaries, think tanks, and educational institutions. Their mission is the same: to accumulate power with the ultimate goal of establishing a one-world government and, in their view, a single global religion centered on self-interest and control. In this story, the methods they employ to achieve their ambitions are as varied as they are destructive. These groups are often associated with global destabilization tactics, which can include military conflict, engineered diseases, climate manipulation, often framed as a man-made crisis, habitat destruction, famine, and economic collapse. These are not just hypothetical threats. They are often framed by the media and governments as urgent issues. However, the troubling reality is that many of these disasters are, in fact, exacerbated or orchestrated by the very same powers that claim to be addressing them. For many decades, the narrative that the Earth's resources are insufficient to sustain the growing global population has been pushed relentlessly. This has provided the justification for a controversial approach to managing population growth. The ruling elites have, according to some accounts, adopted depopulation strategies through both slow and rapid means, contributing to environmental degradation, which in turn leads to health problems for many. This deterioration of the environment is seen by some as part of a broader plan to control and reduce the population. In this story, the well-being of individuals has been systematically undermined through both physical and mental means. Environmental harm has contributed to widespread illness, while mass media and public education are said to have been manipulated to dull the critical thinking abilities of the global population. These influences are believed to be designed to ensure that the majority of people remain unaware of the broader agendas being executed by a small, powerful group. This lack of awareness is seen as a form of control, making it easier for those in power to implement their plans without resistance. At the heart of this story is the belief, held by some, that a select group of powerful individuals view the majority of humanity as expendable. This view holds that the ultimate goal is to reduce the global population drastically, allowing for greater control over the remaining individuals. Recent calls for urgent meetings among world leaders, such as one held by Pope Francis, are seen by some as attempts to accelerate these agendas. For those who believe in these conspiracies, the phrase, "the ends justify the means," has been used to rationalize the extreme measures taken by these groups to achieve their goals. In this story, the fear of discovery by the global population is ever present among those in power. As more individuals become aware of the true nature of these agendas, especially through platforms like the internet, the ruling class is said to feel increasingly threatened. This growing awareness is seen as a catalyst for potential resistance. There is a fear that if the public fully understands the extent of the manipulation, they may rise up against their oppressors. This fear is exemplified by historical quotes, such as one attributed to a prominent leader, George W. Bush, suggesting that if the truth were revealed, those in power could face severe consequences. In this story, there's one final point worth considering. A century after the establishment of the Jesuit Order, which was founded using tactics of infiltration, deception, and subversion, a few other ambitious individuals emerged. These individuals, who were also connected to hidden or less visible religious roots, claimed similar mystical origins. In the 17th and 18th centuries, the Sabbatean Frankist movement grew in Europe and Eurasia, adopting the same methods of achieving power. The tactics used by these groups mirrored those of the Jesuit Order, as they sought to attain godlike authority by gaining control through secretive means. The influence of these secret societies, including remnants of the Sabbatean Frankist movement, can still be seen today among the powerful groups that exert significant control over global events. These organizations, along with other secret societies, have left a lasting mark on history. The impact of their actions, driven by ideologies that, to many, seem to disregard human well-being, has played a role in many of the world's most troubling issues. In this story, the connection between power and corruption becomes even more evident when we look at the darker sides of certain global institutions. The Catholic Church, and particularly the Vatican, has been implicated in a variety of criminal activities, including the troubling global issues of human trafficking, illegal trade in drugs and weapons, and the exploitation of vulnerable individuals. The Church's influence in these matters is seen by some as part of a larger web of corruption, where vast sums of money and power are involved. These activities, often tied to conflicts and wars, are alleged to serve both financial interests and darker, more sinister motives. While many of these groups and individuals may be seen as responsible for their actions, there is also a broader issue of accountability. The immense power wielded by these institutions has, in some accounts, allowed for a culture of cover-ups, where the wrongdoings of those in power are shielded from the public eye. The result is a lack of justice for victims and a continuation of harmful practices that affect not only individuals, but humanity as a whole. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching. Stay safe, and I'll see you in our next video.